Episode of Toolbox, I talked to Michael Jenkins about something every full stack developer should master, and that's DevOps, plus the importance of volunteering, the magic of the cloud, and whether GitHub Actions can deliver a professional CI/CD pipeline. The pace of the web is relentless, and that's why you need the Toolbox. Hello everyone, this is Ravi Lobos, and I stream about full stack tools Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Follow me and subscribe on LinkedIn and YouTube for more content. And if you want to watch any past episodes, make sure you take a look at my blog, which is at rabo.org. You can find an article for today's episode with all the links for the show. So if we mention something, don't worry about it. They're all right here. And down at the very bottom, I have all the links. Also on that website, there is an article with just the interview. So if you just want to watch the interview with Michael, make sure you take a look at that. Just to remind you also, if you want to keep up with what we're up to, you can go to our profile. Mine is at LinkedIn/in/Planet of the Web. And what you could do is turn on the bell icon. However, you can't see it on your own profile. So if you follow me, it's where my pencil icon would be right now. I'm going to go ahead and follow Michael. So this is his page. Links at the bottom, but it's in/Michael Jenkins. And I'm going to click on his bell icon. That way I'll get notified extra whenever he publishes anything. So that'll be pretty awesome. So we're doing things a little bit differently today. Michael is going to be joining us a little bit at the top of the show before I show the interview that has been pre-recorded. So let's see if we can get Michael here. How's it going, Michael?
That's going great, Ray. How are you doing today?
Super cool. I'm so glad you got to make it today. I'm really excited about the interview. One of the things that I mentioned is that I always, because I have to edit them, I always watch the interview 3 or 4 times. And I really kind of tightened them up until they're a lot shorter. So I always get to learn so much from talking to people and interviewing them. The things that I never expected, though, is how much I always find that I have in common with the people that I invite. This is really weird. So besides the fact that we're into the same tech, I learned that you were a Boy Scout probably for a lot longer than I was. How long were you a Boy Scout for?
Oh, my goodness. I was a Boy Scout for probably 4 years, 4 or 5 years, I think.
So I think I lasted a month. And it wasn't anything bad. I just moved to a different country. I joined the Boy Scouts, and for some reason I remember joining the band, and I couldn't play a thing. So they gave me a triangle. I was the classic triangle person. Yeah. But I learned one knot, which is the one that you tie the boats with. This is super useful. I've always wanted to learn more. I'm sure you're probably. Yeah, it's 2 loops and you kind of cross them and man, that tightens up as you pull. That's the one thing I got out of the Boy Scouts. So I didn't make it as much. So I also learned that physics was the reason you switch your major temporarily to journalism. And I didn't really mention this in the interview, but for me, the kryptonite was calculus 2. I had to take that twice. And so that actually made me switch my major because I did start in a more computer related major. But then I went to journalism and I really enjoyed it, and I never went back. And I think it was just the nature of the web was so interesting that it brought me back. The fact that I always had this sort of, desire to learn not just programming, but also design. And I think that the web put that together in a way that it was irresistible. I continued programming, throughout my journalism career. But when the web came back, I was like, wow, this is all the things that I love. So do you find that when you meet other people that you work in tech that you immediately have a lot of stuff in common?
Yeah, I do. And one of the things that's really interesting for folks in tech is, or at least a commonality that I found, is music also. I mean, I know you're a professional triangle player, and maybe, that doesn't go so far as
You
music
know,
goes,
you
but when I was in college, I was a DJ and had a
that's
great
right.
time, working for a radio station and playing music. And I've also met other technologists that were musicians or rappers or also DJs. And so that's another sort of like common thread that I found that's pretty consistent through technology.
That is so true. And there is, if you ever come with me to the San Francisco HQ for LinkedIn, there is a secret music room. I know where it is.
Ah,
And if I find the right person, I let you in there. They have like, they don't have a triangle. I looked, but they have everything else. They have drums. They have several keyboards. They have like, I think like a grand, maybe a baby piano in there, but it's
oh,
completely
wow.
like, it looks just like it's part of the wall. And if you ask the right person, they'll let you at least
Ah,
take a look at it. And I think you have to like know somebody that is already in the special team. So, anyways, yeah, maybe
yeah.
we'll at some point we'll be over there and check it out. But I definitely have found that that is another common thread. My triangle skills haven't really paid out as much. I can't claim that as making me part of the team, but I have found that there's a lot of musicians
Yeah.
on full stack development. So I'm gonna go to some of the news because I usually start the show with a lot of news, and so I will. Let me see. There's a couple of really cool things that I thought were interesting and relevant to what's going on. So I'm gonna take a look at some of those. So I'm gonna start off with, let's see, just a conference that's happening pretty quickly here called Git Merge. I don't know if you've ever been to Git Merge, but they just released, I think today, the full lineup of people going to it. So this is like a very small GitHub universe that is just focused on the Git tool. And so this looks pretty interesting to me. They have a lot of, I think almost a third of the speakers work at GitHub. They obviously have a good relationship, and I think this is like an official GitHub conference. It's in Chicago, September 14th through 15th. So I don't know if they have like an online version of this. I imagine they probably do, but definitely something to sort of put down and join. It's a very affordable conference, it's like 140 something dollars, and it's in Chicago. So if you're maybe in that area, I would love to go, but I have to convince my boss to let me go. We'll see how that works. So
Yeah. I did have
another,
the,
yeah,
oh, sorry to interrupt. I did have the
no,
opportunity to attend Get Merge in Los Angeles. I
oh,
want to say it was probably 2015. So it was some
nice.
time ago. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
they,
a good
they
time.
really know how to put together shows at GitHub. It's really impressive. I haven't been to Git Merge. I've been to like the last several GitHub universes, and they just have a really good department. So another thing that happened was a minor change to GitHub Pages. I don't know if you've seen this at all, but they just made GitHub Pages basically able to launch when so on your GitHub Pages. Normally, you go to Settings and you go to Pages, and then you publish a page. They just turned on GitHub Actions on GitHub Pages deployment. So whereas before you basically got to choose whether you wanted to just serve something from the root, and or you could, I think, choose a different branch, or you could serve from the docs folder. They just modified it so that it just basically right now it just uses GitHub Actions as the deployment. That's pretty interesting because I think it in what we were talking about in the episode, I think it just opens things up to a lot of other possibilities. We were talking about in that interview about how the thing about everything being on GitHub is that it's just a more compelling service when you have everything in one place. So just pushing everything to GitHub Actions, I think, is going to be pretty awesome. So you still
Yeah,
have the
one of
classic
the
option.
cool
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just saying one of the cool things about this too is there may be people who are just, maybe they're technical writers, maybe they're just doing documentation and they're putting that in GitHub and they don't know about GitHub Actions, and that just kind of exposes that service to them. So now they might even take the next step and say, oh man, what can GitHub Actions do for me? And now they're learning more about automation and kind of getting into workflows and everything. So I think that's a very interesting way for GitHub to kind of bring exposure to the Actions service.
Yeah, there's a blog post that think I'm going to get to in just a minute, but they mentioned like how many pages are already served with this, and it's an unbelievable amount. Now, what I do, so this is one of the slides from one of my courses, and so what I do is actually use a GitHub pre-built GitHub action. So this basically gives you the same options, but I think this is for right now on how to launch. You can do a Jekyll page, or you can do a static HTML, just like you can right now. Or if you go to the deploy from a branch, it lets you use kind of like the classic way of doing things, which is still what I'm using. I use this other tool called, or this other library called GitHub Pages Deploy Action. And what that does is when I use my build process, essentially it will automatically generate a different branch with my with my build process. So I think that before you had to have what's called a GH pages branch, a special branch where you were able to publish things too. And so this basically let you create, first of all, it let you use any folder, so it didn't have to be a docs folder or a build folder. You can name the folder that you want. And then it also takes that build, pushes everything to a custom branch, and then you can serve from that custom branch. So what I didn't like about using GitHub Pages is that you kind of like had to pre-render and then push, or had some other sort of process. So this particular action makes it pretty clean. I don't know what kind of things you're using to deploy, or if you even use GitHub Pages a bit.
GitHub Pages, not so much, but yeah, GitHub Actions all over the place. Pretty much any repo that I put into GitHub, I've probably got some kind of action tied to it, whether it's a deployment or linting. And linting, that's one of the things you just get free out of the box. If you have a Python project, I use this for Python all the time. If you have a Python project and you just go to the Actions tab, and it'll be blank, you say, create a workflow, whatever the button says, and you set it up, it'll recognize that you have Python code in your repo and give you suggested workflows. So then all you have to do is click, say, yes, I want this one. You commit that code, and it's already set up and done. You really didn't have to do anything but click like maybe 3 times. And so after that, every time you push code, you're getting free linting and analysis of your code that you just get out of the box. So
that's awesome.
I use that all the time.
Yeah, one of my predictions about GitHub Pages when Microsoft bought GitHub was, there's like this kind of hidden way of deploying things directly on GitHub. I bet you eventually they're going to make that a bigger piece of the sort of action. They started focusing on other things, but I think that potentially, if you can now add to all the things that you're talking about, deployment directly on GitHub, like you don't have to deploy to a different server. You just boom, everything is right there.
Yeah.
Then again, it just becomes a more compelling experience.
Yeah, no doubt. Because that connection with Microsoft has all the compute that you could ever want, right? With their cloud services. So imagine you just say, hey, I have this application, in a GitHub repo. You just click a button that says set up this workflow for deployment to this service, and next thing you know, you have an endpoint that you could use to access your service, and you didn't do anything. That's like the height of automation right there.
Totally. And so what I use it for most of the time is, if you've ever taken some of my courses, I have basically something called Reveal.js that lets me write my courses in Markdown. And so I've added a lot of extra stuff to it, but I always deploy using GitHub Pages. So if you go to like rabo.org, so it has a custom domain name as well, and then you use slides, and then whatever the name of the slide is, it could be like Tailwind 3, or this one's JS functions. Then it gives you like a little website that you can deploy. And in addition to that, it has a way, it actually uses like 11t to build a microsite that's basically the notes that I use when I'm teaching. Super handy for that. And just having everything in one place is making it so that I don't have to ever, I don't really pay for much hosting anymore. I
Mhm.
still pay for one server, but I stopped paying for web hosting because I can do most of the things that I need just using, Actions and Pages now. And I think that there's a compelling, if Microsoft would
Yeah.
listen to me, there's a compelling sort of place for deploying everything, like just letting you do everything. I'm sure they got smarter people than me, so I'm sure they've already thought about it. So pretty cool stuff. There's also a place where you can get some starter workflows. So with that, there's a link to this page that gives you work like actions basically that have been pre-made for different categories. So you may want to check that out also in the show notes as well. So definitely something that you should keep in mind. Another thing that just came out that it was one of those transformative projects for me was, I don't know if you use this a lot, something called Vite. They call it next generation front end tooling. So this is basically, if you've ever used something like Webpack or Rollup, this is basically like a Rollup tool. It uses Rollup, but it makes building things, easier out of the box. And a lot of times you think that if you made something opinionated, that it would be a bad thing. But I feel like when I find things that I agree with 100% with that, and I don't know, like sometimes you feel like, oh, well, this opinionated tool does everything except for this one thing and I can't stand it. Well, I find that there are certain tools that are so good that they pretty much guess what I would normally do. And this is one of them. It has like all the hot bells and whistles. So HMR hot module replacement, which means that if you're creating a project and you have a small change that you want to make, say to your SaaS or a small change to one of your JavaScript modules, it builds it super quick because it just rebuilds. I don't even know what the magic is behind this, but basically it only rebuilds the little, piece of JavaScript without having to touch anything else. I don't know if you ever did something like Gulp, which was pretty awesome, but every time you touched anything, it would be, whoa, hold on, got to rebuild like the entire thing. And, if you had a big site, it would be kind of a pain, right?
Yeah, indeed. And one of the cool things about tools like that, getting back to Actions, you can use caching to
Mm-hmm.
cache npm modules, to cache Python libraries, or whatever Go modules, and so on. But if the build tool itself is already aware of these changes that speed things up, and that's the benefit of caching, is that you don't have to download these modules every single time you build your
Mm-hmm.
application. So it speeds up your build time. Um, but if the build tool itself is already aware and customized or developed to speed things up, then that just makes your builds even faster. So yeah, it's really cool to see something like that native to the tool that's building your application.
Yeah, the cool thing is that it's being so well adopted by the industry. Like I was going through a process of rethinking what I was using exactly when this first version of this thing came out. So it came from the Vue.js team, who has,
Mm.
I think, the best CLI in the business. If you look at that CLI, it's just a beautiful thing. I think everybody else is kind of caught up now, but they started this sort of build process tool, and it very quickly got like adopted by everyone because it
Mm.
apparent that it was just so superior. It just did everything. So it does things like it understands how to process SCSS files like by default. You can import assets, so you can import JSON, you can import images and assign them to like a variable. What I use it for a lot is I import like my markdown, and then I can use something to parse out what's in the markdown file, and then I can do something to, either process or display. So it does all that automatically for you. All the things that you are going to probably need are in here, and it's just like super simple. The configuration is pretty easy, and the way that you work with things. So one of the big changes in this version. Another thing that I have to mention is that in when I just updated like my slideshow thing that I showed you to V3, so I was on V2, and even though it's another major release, I didn't have to do anything. Like it just worked. So if you look at the changelog, they're very careful about what they modify. It's usually so you'll see things like they will they will require newer versions of something like npm. They'll discontinue certain things that don't make any sense anymore, and the rest of it is new features. So, for example, this is a new feature which is the import metaglob. So, if you want to import a whole folder of markdown files for some sort of processing, you used to be able to do that, but now you can import an array of glob files, which is pretty super powerful. So you can say, I don't only want this folder of Markdown, but I also want that folder of Markdown. Throw me some JavaScript in there. And then there's all kinds of ways of customizing like what you get. So really cool stuff. I love this. And it just, I don't know when I fell asleep and it went from 1 to 3, but it doesn't seem like it's been more than like a year and a half. And it really it's something that I see other people using quite a bit. So definitely something you should check out. Now let's see, what else do I have here? There is this other tool that I found called, and I think I need to go to this site here. So basically what I use for icons, I don't know if you use a lot of icons, but being that I am a partial designer, I'm like Spock. I'm like half human, half Vulcan kind of. So one of the things that I use a lot is icons for projects. So my current favorite is this Bootstrap icons. It has a lot of icons, but even with 1,600 icons, occasionally you're like, man, it just doesn't have that, photocopier that I need, or the fax machine. How could they not have a fax machine in the project? So there's a project. There's a project that basically lets you look at, and for some reason I don't have it here, so I'm gonna have to get back to it later. So there's a project that lets you aggregate all of the icons into a single library. And I'm going to have to add it to the show notes because somehow I forgot to put it up here. But yeah, that'll be a bonus on the next episode. I'll make sure that I'll add the link to the phone. But basically what it does, I don't know if you've used this kind of thing before, where when you want to use like a material assign icons, or there's a great icon library called, I think, css.gg that I love. Like occasionally, you want to kind of stick with one library, but you end up having to load like 2 or 3 libraries, and then you end up loading like all the stuff for that one icon. Well, this gives you like a library that allows you to just grab one icon from one library, grab one icon for another one, and when you build, it just outputs like the 2 icons that you were using. And it has hooks for like React, for Vue, for like all the things, or just plain JavaScript. That's the kind of tool that I think saves you a lot of time. And it's so good. I wish I had it to be able to show everyone. But, that's what happens with live stuff.
Yeah, and that sounds like an awesome tool. I am not a designer, but I do poke in libraries and that one, the Bootstrap icons. I often use icons out of there. And yeah, I'm totally guilty of doing things that like I'm just going to pull everything in here for this 1 or 2 icons that I need. Or I'm going through a library exactly like you said. It's like, oh, they don't have the icon, their exact shape or size or whatever it is that I need. So then I'll pull in another library, and then my stuff gets all bloated and kind of crazy. But this is a way to optimize that. And I mean, and I'm looking at all these suggestions that you're offering from the DevOps perspective, meaning I'm trying to optimize the build time. I'm trying to optimize the size of the artifact and all that. So anything that you can do to make your build faster and your artifacts smaller, it improves everything across the board. So I'm literally taking notes as it's like I'm watching this for the first time myself, right?
Yeah, it's
I'm taking notes for all this, all the stuff I'm going to look back.
Awesome. Well, it must be good. So I got a couple of other cool things. Let me show you something called Patterns.dev. So this is a project. So this comes from a book that Adi Osmani made a long time ago. I think it was one of those O'Reilly animal books. And he's updated it for web, for newer versions of web applications. And you can download the book. It's like a free book if you want to read like a print book, or the whole thing is available, here on the web. So you can hit get started. And I think it takes you to like also, this is basically like if you want to create or know how to do like a JavaScript mixing pattern, or you want to know how to do a module pattern. This has details of a lot of patterns, and I do think they have like even some React patterns in here. And then what the update has been. So he joined up with a designer who's also a developer to create like a lot of animations and projects. So here's the progressive hydration pattern. So there's videos, there's these really awesome animations, and then they just give you code sandboxes to go try this stuff in, or to see that a process applied in a practical sense. Just the type of sort of learning that I love, and a fantastically done website. So that's definitely something you can check out at Patterns.dev. So anyways, really, really good stuff that I find. I don't know. I feel like I find a lot of cool stuff, and then I'm like you. I make notes, and then I distill the notes. And before I show up, I try to bring some stuff that I find interesting. I figured some other people, some other nerds, like my wife calls us, uh, would
Right.
find it useful. So cool. I'm really happy and about the interview that I did. I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Let's go ahead and
Indeed.
take a look at that. And
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Michael Jenkins is a lead software engineer at a leading company in entertainment. He has experience with Linux and Windows systems administration, as well as process automation and technical writing. Now, as far as languages, he's fluent in Bash, Perl, and Python. Plus, he's familiar with cloud technologies like Amazon Web Services, the Google Cloud Platform, and Microsoft Azure. How's it going, Michael?
It's going great, Ray. I'm so glad to be here talking with you today.
Tell me a little bit about your education.
I had the fortunate experience to go to a magnet high school in Atlanta, Georgia. And the focus there was engineering and applied technology. So even in high school, I was getting hands-on experience with what was the cutting edge computing at the time, IBM XT, AT computers. And from there, I went to Iowa State University, where I
Mhm.
majored in computer engineering. Really enjoyed the computer engineering curriculum. I did transfer a couple times.
Mhm.
I also enjoyed journalism, so I actually did leave computer engineering and go to journalism. I came back to computer engineering after a couple semesters to finish out my engineering degree. But really, it was just a love for technology and wanting to learn as much as I could about building computer
Mhm.
systems that really sort of drove my education.
With technology changing so much, what sort of things did you learn in college that you think are still going to be something useful today?
The programming languages that I learned in college,
Hmm.
they're not popular now, like Lisp and Scheme. I mean, God bless you folks that if you're watching and you program in Lisp. One of the key takeaways that I sort of carry from my college days is the ability to learn. You're given an opportunity to absorb that information, and then you're prompted with a challenge or some sort of problem. And you have
Hmm.
to take what you've learned about that topic to solve that problem. And that's the same throughout your career, no matter how experienced you are as an engineer, as a developer.
That's a really good point. I think you do start learning some of that in school, working through a lot of projects, opportunities to work with other people, and it kind of teaches you how to deal with people who have different styles. Now, you started working with things like integrated circuits using Perl, Bash, and Makefile scripts. Tell me a little bit about what took you from there and pointed you into the direction that you're in right now.
My junior and senior years, I started studying microelectronic fabrication. And I really, really got hooked on it. Basically, I learned how to take silicon wafers and use chemical processes to imprint transistors on these silicon wafers and make computer chips. I was more interested in the circuits and the connections and the wires and everything inside the computer than I was more about the software itself. And I still got the first silicon wafer that I've made. I've
Wow.
got it kind of stored away so I could look at it from time to time and just reflect on that. My first job out of college was actually using programming languages to define integrated circuits. They're called application specific integrated circuits, or ASICs. So
Hmm.
I was using a programming language called VHDL to describe the logic that is eventually implemented in a circuit. But I started to also apply this programming experience that I had picked up. And where those two met was in a process called synthesis, or circuit synthesis,
Hmm.
and circuit validation, where me as the circuit designer or the circuit verifier would run these processes against the code.
Hmm.
And a lot of that was powered from the command line. So I was able to write bash scripts and Perl scripts and make files that automated a lot of those processes. So that's really where I kind of got the joy out of like, okay, I can do the circuit stuff, but it's not all the, so I don't know if you've seen pictures of people in an Intel lab or something like that, where they've
Yes,
got
the
the
bunny
bunny
suits.
suit
Yeah, that's right.
I was learning more about scripting and, automating. I became more efficient automating the synthesis and the verification of the design than doing the actual design itself.
Hmm.
So that led me to a role where I was actually called an application engineer. So I became responsible for setting up the Linux systems that other engineers used. This was circa, let's just call it 2001, 2002, somewhere around there. And I was actually doing what we would call now DevOps work. I took my experience as an application engineer supporting circuit designers, and I was able to take that into a role where I was actually supporting mechanical engineers. The key thing, though, was using scripting and automation to help these engineers be more efficient. I wish I had been more keen to jump onto this idea of DevOps. As I stopped supporting mechanical engineers, I found myself in a role where I was again supporting designers. This time they were actually web designers. They were using Java basically to design web portals and applications that worked on web platforms like Apache and Nginx. The same thread, I should say, that remained constant was automation. And at this time, the birth of the cloud, quickly being able to provision resources. Those were the things that really, really drew me into the space that I'm in now, because I mean, I remember days where if I wanted to set up a new computer system or, a group of servers, I would have to put in a purchase order and I might have to wait a couple months before those computers showed up. Then when they showed up, I have to unbox them. I have to put them in a rack. I have to wire them up.
Wow.
I have to get power. It's just basically all these things that you have to do to acquire this compute resource. But then when I started to learn about the cloud, and I'm like, okay, I could just log into this website and click a button and I get 20 servers, sign me up.
Now, one thing I found super interested in your profile is that passion for journalism, which I share as well. Talk a little bit about your experience and maybe if there's anything that you've taken from that has still maybe helped you today.
Journalism is something that I'm really passionate about. In high school, I did the newspaper, I did the yearbook, and I really enjoyed those things. So when I went to college, I started doing radio. All through that time, I had a radio show every Thursday from 3 to 6. I was on the air, I was playing tunes and everything, and I really enjoyed that. I also did some magazine and some newspaper work. I did transfer away from engineering to journalism because I was like, physics is hard. I mean, God bless all you physicists out there, people that are great at physics, but that was the point where when physics came up in my curriculum, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to drop computer engineering. And I did some television too. Television was great. This was a campus student-run TV station, and we had to do what we can. What I've learned through that is the ability to craft and to share a story. We as engineers and developers and creators, we often have to share our ideas. If you're a visionary and you can see where you want to go and you want to bring somebody into your mission, you have to tell the story. You have to explain to them like, hey, this is where we're starting. And this is sort of the vision that I have for this project or this design or whatever it is. And this is where we're going to end up once we finish this process of getting through all these steps. If you can craft that story, then you can be successful in pretty much whatever you're doing. So
even if you're a developer, you still need to be able to take those concepts and convince people that some of the stuff that you're doing is great.
We as developers and engineers, some people may be watching this and considering to submit a proposal for a talk at a conference. Same thing. Same preparation goes into it. Same storytelling element goes into it. And the one, I guess, thing that I would offer as the caveat, and I can't remember who told this to me, but they said, never give a presentation for the first time. And it's kind of mind blowing because you're like, how can I never give the presentation for the first time? It has to be a first time. Well, that means you've practiced it, you've delivered it, you've studied it, and you've maybe shared it with some people.
Another thing that I found super cool is that you're very active with volunteering opportunities. So talk a little bit about how volunteering and networking has helped your career.
It doesn't matter where you are in your career, what path, what career you're in, you can't do it by yourself. You have to have a network. I've always been a fan of building networks. As a kid, I was in the Boy Scouts. I did Toastmasters.
I could
Um,
totally see all these things in you. Yeah.
you know, I had a lot of fun on teams in high school, and so I've always been a fan of giving back to communities that invest in you. Outside of that, I've also given back to other organizations in my community. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. I'm also a member of Blacks in Technology. I enjoy taking my time and my talent and giving back to the community. As I was a child growing up, there were so many people that invested in me as an individual. It's only my responsibility to continue that and invest in other people around my community and help them level up in whatever way I can.
Most of the jobs that you get in your career, you get from somebody that has experience working with you.
I am totally happy just sitting here in my office. So when I am in spaces where I have the opportunity to connect with people, I try to break out of my shell and go that extra mile to introduce myself or to talk to people or to ask questions. But there are opportunities, and when I have those opportunities, I try my hardest to just kind of break out of the shell and do what I can to make those connections.
I think something weird happens when you go to an event where everybody is like you. My wife one time was dropping me off somewhere, and she looked at all the people in the conference and she was like, "Look, it's a bunch of nerds just like you, honey." I'm like, "Okay, great." It's easier like when you meet somebody like you to start talking about things that you're passionate about. I think that you have a lot of courses that anybody could get a lot out of. I really love your DevOps tips course. So I love this video that you did on upskilling your team. So important. I've talked to a lot of people in the industry who own companies who can't find developers. And that's one thing that I bring up. Well, what are you doing with the people that you have, right? What do you recommend employers and employees do to encourage this kind of upskilling?
The benefit for management in those situations is that they usually have people, but maybe those people don't have the skills that they need to solve a particular problem, that they're trying to face. Maybe it's not as fast as if you hire a contractor, but the difference is that person who's already there, they know your business, they know your clients, they know your customers, so they kind of know how to make things work. If all they need is this one particular skill, be it programming or Excel or, Photoshop, whatever it is, they can learn that on the job. Or if you give them space to learn it, they can learn it on their own. Or go to training and learn it that way. So that way, when they come back with those skills, or as they're infused with those skills, number one, they have that skill now, and number two, they still have all the same experience that they've had leading up to that point. And so they know how to get that purchase order through after they've developed this process to automate the whole thing, Whereas if you hire that contractor, you're going to suffer from a ramp up time. There are trade-offs in both cases, but I feel like when you upskill, you just instill more
Great culture, I think, right? Those kind of people tend to stick around too because they know that it's not just what they're doing today, but that they have value as the company grows.
Exactly. And that's the word I was looking for. It's that cultural change that you say, like, hey, we're together. We are committed to each other to solve this problem, to do this thing that we call work.
Yeah, another tip that I love was your concept of using chat ops to improve how you interact with meetings. I go to so many meetings that are just so boring. So this is really great. Can you talk about the things that you're doing maybe before and after a meeting that other people aren't doing that could be really beneficial?
If you have a note taker, somebody that's taking notes, so you have this thread that's sort of capturing these highlights from the meeting, you can refer to that after the meeting as an artifact. Beforehand, you might want to share some ideas, some highlights to let people know, like, hey, this is what we really need to hit on in this meeting, so that people are ready to dive in.
A developer finds ways of streamlining anything, like even a meeting. What else can you automate or streamline, and how can you leverage the fact that you know how to do shell scripts?
Transcript in that. That's totally cool, where you can just like, oh, wait, what did I say in that meeting 3 weeks ago? Well, let me just pull up the transcript. Oh, there it is right there at 3 p.m. I said, XYZ.
One of the biggest things that's happening now in the industry is a move to cloud coding.
One thing I like about the GitHub code spaces approach, considering that you can have a code space for every different project that you're working on, and all of them are configured differently, with maybe one project that you're looking at is JavaScript heavy, and then you flip and you're working on a project that has to do with infrastructure, and now you're totally dialed in to work with Terraform or CloudFormation. That might be harder to do on your desktop. You're sort of flipping between these plugins that are installed. On top of that is AI and code generation. It comes with some controversy because people are like, oh, where are you getting this code from? Automated code generation is the next step for this developing on the cloud. It can help enable people who, number one, who are learning programming languages, and number two, it can expedite the programming that people who are experienced with the language. So for the people who are learning, they might not know what a for loop looks like in Rust, for example. They can take a for loop, they hit tab or return or whatever, and they've got the for loop, and they can start to fill in the blanks. Like, okay, that's what it looks like. Or maybe it saves them time because they don't have to reach for documentation. For the experienced designer, they could probably fly through a design. Maybe they can do what they did in a day in an hour now. And just think about how that multiplies their time. So now they've got project one that maybe it took them a week to knock out. They're knocking that out in a couple of days, and then they could pick up project two, and now they're knocking out 2 projects in a week. Automated code generation is going to be key for everybody who's coding.
Think about when you begin a project, what are you doing? You clone the repo locally, then you npm install, then you build. I have the shirt that says, in case of fire, git commit, git push, and get out. Because it is a cloud environment, everything that you're doing is being stored for you in memory. When I have to go to the office, I get really nervous because I start wondering, did I push? Did I commit? Did I forget? Because you ever not committed something and then you go somewhere and it's not there anymore? Whatever I do on my machine at home is already done in my machine at work. And it really blows your mind.
You can be on any platform now and look at your code. Say you started a project on your laptop, then you go to another computer and you have to configure that environment. You pull down the code and now you're all set. With something like a code space, you could start on your laptop. You could switch to your phone while you're on the train or whatever. You get to the office, maybe you pick up a tablet and now you can look at your code in a tablet. All that device is now is just like a terminal. It's like a portal to get to where the stuff is. When you're onboarding somebody to an established project, I mean, think about all the times that you've joined a team or started working on something and you're like, okay, give me the repo. Okay, I got the repo. What tools do I need locally? Oh, you got to install this. You got to install this. Oh, you also got to configure this to do X, Y, Z. So then you change, your whole local configuration to run this one project. And I mean, how long does that take? And then, God forbid, you have to switch. Somebody says, hey, can you help me on this other project? And you're like, yeah, I can help you out. So then you start to work on that project. And they're like, oh, wait, you can't use that version of MySQL locally. You have to use this other version. You're like, if you're working in a code space, you could say, well, okay, I'm new to the team. How do I get started? Well, all you do is you go to this web page and you click this button that says launch your environment. Boom, you got it. You're up and running. You can start coding right away. Somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, help me with project number 2. Okay, cool. How do I get started? Well, you go to this web page and you see how it just kind of saves all this time.
Yeah, I think I just have to get through the uneasiness. It's sort of like when I did Google Docs and I'm like, where's the save? How come I can't file save? You're not going to miss the fact that you have the wrong version of NPM installed. Speaking of GitHub, you've also done some courses on GitHub Actions. Do you think that it can deliver a robust enough experience right now?
A key benefit of GitHub Actions is it's all in one system on one platform on GitHub versus some other platforms where you have to integrate through webhooks or API keys or pushes or whatever it takes to get system B connected to GitHub, which is system A. The biggest thing though is the fact that you can use Actions to automate just about anything in GitHub. If somebody joins your team and they clone your repo, you could set up an action that says, hey, welcome to our team. There's so many different ways that you can automate the interactions with GitHub because all of these triggers, all of these events are exposed to you as a person who's using GitHub Actions. And that will be much harder to do in a framework, automation framework that's not exposed to all of these things that GitHub offers as a platform.
It's not necessarily that GitHub Actions is the most robust thing, is that you have all your security keys, you have dependency tracking. So another course that I think everybody should watch is this course that you did on nailing your DevOps interview. For somebody who's thinking about a career switch into DevOps, what do you think makes a great DevOps engineer?
The 2 key tenets of DevOps are, the communication and the people. I could build the best CI/CD pipeline for a hello world application, and it would be amazing, right? But if I don't understand the need for that automation, if I don't understand the people and the processes that will depend on that automation, then my super glamorous hello world, deployment process.
I do love that it's a hello world, though.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. That's the thing. If you give an engineer enough time and enough compute power, they're gonna build a palace, right? You like, well, what's the app? Oh, it prints hello world. Well, guess what? We're gonna have linting. We're gonna have check. We're gonna run tests. We're
That's
gonna have
right.
this
That's
build
right.
pipeline. It's gonna be amazing. But if you don't have a connection with the people and the processes that are dependent on your automation, that's the biggest part of DevOps. Just knowing why, the why part, like why do we need to develop this? What's important about this?
Mm.
And what's the benefit of making this build faster? What's the benefit of automating this particular process? And once you learn those things, that's the enlightened DevOps engineer, I think.
That's great. I did love that you actually mentioned that if you're thinking of maybe changing careers to DevOps, it's simply just deploying to cloud services would be a great start.
If you talk with creatives and you talk with developers, the creative will have the idea like to describe the website. And that developer, they're going to help them take it to the next level. They're going to pull in the proper JavaScript framework. You need somebody that can say, okay, I can take this design and I can put it online where it's serviceable, where people can get to it, where it's secure, because security is such a big piece of what we do. It's going to be performant. It's going to have automated checks. Maybe it'll have self-healing. And that's where like the ops side kind of comes to bear. But you are just like that much more ahead of your peers if you can say, okay, I've got this application and now I can put it into a place where other people can look at it and I can collect metrics from that. And get feedback on it and improve on it. And that's where that sort of that DevOps cycle, comes into play.
Servers are back. They're becoming a more important part of the pipeline. That sort of phase that we went through where we were pre-rendering everything and pushing it up, all that's being now handled by the cloud. Talk about what the opportunities are like in DevOps, especially with the current challenges in the industry.
I think the next big thing is going to the edge. And by edge computing, I mean running processes in the cloud, but not necessarily in data centers, but even further out so that they're closer to mobile devices. They're closer to your browser. They can send you data faster. If you're a developer and you're thinking about mobile design, knowing how the next generation of that is going to look.
There is a lot of opportunities for people who understand that. If you look at the frameworks that we're seeing right now, they're edge computing based frameworks. If you have those skills and understand some of these things that are happening, then you're going to be ready for the future. Where can somebody find what you're up to?
I think LinkedIn is the best place to get a hold of me and to learn what I'm doing. I am also on Twitter at Managed Chaos. That's KAOS.
Well, thank you so much for the interview. I really, really appreciate it. I know that I'm going to be one of those people that is just going to be waiting for your show to start. I can't wait to see what you come up with.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to it. So thanks for that push, and I can't wait to interact with the folks that are watching this. I really want to continue to have that relationship by sharing what I feel is interesting to me with people that share the same interests as well.
So I really learned a lot from not just doing an interview, but also watching it and rewatching it. So I think the key is store those things and look up things that you found interesting. I know that I learned a lot, and I'd like to go to a Q&A, but before I do that, I definitely want to correct not necessarily an error, but just an omission about the icon library that I was showing you before. So this is it. It's called Unpluging Icons. It basically gives you access to more than 100 popular icon sets. So 10,000 plus icons in all kinds of other stuff with hooks into the major frameworks. So definitely in the show notes, I'll put it in there if it's not already in there. Let's go to some Q&A. So I'm going to bring Michael back up here, and I'll pull up some Q&A while we were talking. Somebody thankfully told me what the only knot that I know is. It's called, you probably know this, it's called a clove hitch. I don't know. Maybe that's what it's called. I don't remember it because I learned it in Spanish too, so which is even worse. I don't know what it's called. Maybe it was like a ballestrinque, I think it was. I don't know. It's been so long. Somebody else is saying that they were asking a question about whether or not you think something like Vercel or Vite. I think they meant like Vercel or Netlify. So what are your thoughts on some of these sort of deployment platforms that are out there, Michael?
Yeah, indeed. So the deployment like Netlify, when you're working with say like not necessarily pure static applications, but applications that don't have such a heavy back end requirement. Tools like Netlify and even GitHub Pages. We talked about GitHub
Hmm.
Pages as well. And then there's also AWS Amplify is another
Hmm.
option for that. Uh,
And Vercel is
Those
also pretty
workflow
popular. I think that's one that they were mentioning. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not as familiar with Vercel, but if it's like
Hmm.
similar capabilities to these other platforms, I say go for it because number one, it takes away that burden of having to manage servers or to
Hmm.
having to set up some sort of compute environment other than creating the account, getting the API key or whatever you got to do, and then that interaction or that connection to your GitHub repo. At that point, you can focus on the design and just pushing the code, and a lot of the hosting and the deployment and all that kind of stuff is taken care of, is managed for you, so you don't have to worry about it. And I think that's the key for developers, if to be able to focus on their design, but to be also to be knowledgeable of the deployment and the hosting. And so like for me, I'm almost a pure DevOps guy, right? So we're kind of meeting in the middle. I'm going from the DevOps side, and a lot of the viewers of this show are coming from the design side or the
Hmm.
development side. But the more knowledge that each of us has of the other person's role and their needs, as we're working together as a team, that just makes us more effective. Or if you're, a solo developer, a solo designer, so you have to take care of the entire thing, this whole literally a full stack from, the front to the back and the development and the hosting, then that just makes you more capable if you know how to work with these systems, and it just makes it easier for you because you don't have to worry about again servers and patching and all this other kind of stuff that a larger scale system or a server
Hmm.
based system might have to be worried about.
That brings up another question that we got here from somebody just called a LinkedIn user. This is LinkedIn. Whenever, depending on how you have your kind of security or privacy set up, sometimes it just says LinkedIn user. But I think that there a lot of people feel like things are moving from maybe a more developer. A lot of things that developers maybe handled are now being handled more by designers. What do you think is the right kind of place? How much should a designer have to know, like to be maybe hireable, or do you feel like they're doing too much now? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think. Well, I mean, and it all the easy answer is it depends, right?
Right.
But I think as a designer, you should at least be knowledgeable of the capabilities of a system.
Hmm.
So if you are developing an application, at least have some idea of where that application might be deployed. If it's a mobile application, then you should know, okay, well, this is a mobile application that's native to iOS or it's native to Android. Or if it's a web application, then okay, well, this web application is going to need a database server, and that database is going to have to be NoSQL or SQL. So you maybe you don't know how to deploy that database server, but you know that your design, your application is going to need that service on the back end. So that way, when you're proposing a design to someone, you can have a more complete proposal that says, okay, I'm delivering you this Vue.js application, this React.js application. It's going to require this particular thing on the back end. So because it's going to need this, I'm going to need support from a database administrator to set up the database. Or if you are this true full stack developer, designer, DevOps combo, then you can say, yeah, I'm ready to deploy or this application, or this is what my application is going to take, and this is the way that I'm going to set up the hosting. I'm going to use Netlify. I'm going to use a EC2 server, and I'm going to use this database on the back end. DynamoDB for a NoSQL database versus RDS for a SQL, or traditional managed database service database. So the more that you know about all of these things, it just makes you more capable and more valuable as a team member, as an employee, as a candidate for a new job. So I don't think you have to know, but it helps.
That's so true. And I think that the more you know, the better. And what I always tell people is don't necessarily try to learn something completely new, but start where you're at. So if you're a place that uses EC2 or Amazon Web Services, learning a little bit about what happens is going to make you more valuable to the company itself. And that's a good place to go. Like, start learning a little more about what happens with the deployment. What else can you do? How do you configure some tests, things like that. Like when you talked about GitHub and the fact that, it gives you easy ways of doing things. Like, start with the easy stuff, and then you might find that, like you really enjoy that sort of environment, and that's maybe something that pushes you a little bit further. So we have a couple of more questions. One of them is a comment, and this is fantastic from Chocolate Twist Yoga, my favorite name today. Never give a presentation for the first time. The one takeaway I think from this meeting, I should have given this presentation so that I would make sure that I didn't forget the unpluging icons, but it happens. Life stuff is different. And then we have, this is a great questions from Ilyas Barikov. Basically, top 5 tools that you use. This is a tough one. That's a top 5. It's a lot of tools. So I don't know what I would say. I mean, Pages, I think Code Spaces, Vite was one of them for me. And then, man, I use so many different frameworks. Markdown, I think, and I can't think of a fifth, so I'm going to let you go, and then I'll think of like the fifth one.
Yeah, no doubt. So, iTerm. I'm a Mac user. I love Windows systems. Windows 11 in particular has got a lot of great features, but I use Mac OS for work and a lot of stuff at home. I do have a Windows computer as well, but iTerm is my preferred terminal on Mac OS. I'm in iTerm almost all day, every day. And because I'm in iTerm, I'm using a terminal, then I use Vim as my editor almost exclusively. So that's like my second tool. I will say VS Code as 3, but let me qualify that, because usually what I'm using VS Code for is to look at directory structure, and people clown me for this all the time, but I will open VS Code and I will maximize the terminal inside VS Code. So again, I'm back in the terminal, and now I'm running Vim inside VS Code, and people are like, "Why would you even
crazy.
do that?" Well, I'm more comfortable using Vim. I just want like the file browser that VS Code offers me. So what's that? iTerm, Vim, VS Code, Git. I mean, for managing everything. And I mean, you mentioned Markdown. That's I like all of my notes, all of anything I'm typing that's not code is probably going to be in Markdown, because I can take that anywhere. I can take Markdown into Obsidian for notes. I can take Markdown into Hugo for websites. I can even take Markdown into like a Word document, and because I can look at the formation of what the actual marks look like I know that's going to be a header, I know that's going to be a subheader, I know this is code, and then I can format it in Word to the way that it's supposed to look like. So Markdown for sure when I'm typing anything.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned probably my fifth one would be Obsidian, because I use that thing so much. Anything that kind of helps me sort of organize those teams, of course. But anything like that is pretty cool. That's actually a great question. It seems like doesn't that seem like a perfect sort of interview question? Like, I learned so much from your favorite 5 tools that I would learn, like, oh, you're one of those Vim people. Like, right? I can't figure out how to quit the thing, or might have learned more about it. But I always have to like close the window or whatever. So I use Hyper, I think, for my standalone sort of editor. I know you'd have some polls on like Bash versus C Shell. What's your take on that?
You know what? Yeah, I mean, Bash. I've used Bash for as long as I can remember. Well, even before that, I was using some people may not know as the TC shell, or you might is TCSH, and that was it's a terminal shell based on the C language as far as the scripting goes. And then I can't remember when, and this is gonna age me, but turn of the century, I moved from TC shell to Bash, and I was like, oh wow, this is pretty cool. Because before that, people have been trying to get me to come over to Bash. They're like, oh, you're still using TC shell? Come over to Bash. And I'm like, okay, I'll give it a shot. So now I'm for the past 20 plus years, I've been all in on Bash, and it's great. The 2 comments I'll offer to that is PowerShell is awesome. PowerShell is amazing, and that's one of the things that I really like using on Windows platforms, because with PowerShell, well, in most modern scripting languages, you can have a pipe on the command line, right? You're piping the output from one command into the next command. Well, in PowerShell, you can pipe actual objects. In Bash, you're only piping text. But in PowerShell, you can pipe an entire object with all of the the methods and all of the values of that object and everything into the next command to use. And that just, when I learned that, just blew my mind, right? So now you've got PowerShell, and you can use PowerShell on Linux and Mac OS as well. It's not limited to Windows. So that just, like, again, it opens up a lot of capabilities for that language. Now, getting back to Mac OS, they are defaulting to Z Shell. And so now I'm faced with another sort of existential crisis, right? It's like, okay, do I keep Bash? And I did a LinkedIn survey for this about a month ago, where I asked people, like, hey, I got a new computer, a new Mac, and the default shell is now Z Shell. Do I stay with Bash and like bring along all of my aliases and all of my functions and all this other stuff and be immediately capable, or do I take this time to learn the Z Shell and like become really effective with it and adopt this as my new shell going forward for the next 20 years? Or do I just say, you know what, just like leave it all alone? But the majority of the folks, and I fell into this category as well, was like, okay, stick with Bash Shell, because that's what you know and love. I've got an entire toolbox. We're talking about toolboxes. I've got an entire toolbox of functions and aliases and shortcuts and Bash that make me totally efficient, that I would struggle a little bit as I convert everything to be more capable and more, to work properly with Z Shell. So I don't know, maybe I went off off track a little bit there, but
no. I think we were totally nerding and geeking out on shells. I don't feel like I'm qualified to tell you the correct answer. You do make a good point that 20 years of shell, utilities and stuff like that. It's something that's hard to give up. You might have to wait another 20 years. And they'll have, like, I don't know, ZZ shell or triple Z or whatever, something else. Meanwhile, I'll stick to like Nano as my terminal tool of choice, and definitely VS Code. I just can't do the Vim. I've seen people that are so good at it, but they also have, like, I don't know what, like 2050 eyesight, and their font is like at 3 points on this like tiny screen. So I just can't go there. I'm too much of a hybrid, I think. So thank you so much, Michael, for coming. I was really happy. It actually worked out super well that we were able to have both you at the beginning and then at the end. So thank you for all the extra time. So other than that, I have to go into course production next for a couple of weeks. So I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks, and then I'm going to schedule some other interviews. Let me know what you want me to cover in the comments, or just reach out to either of us on LinkedIn or on YouTube. Thank you so much, and hopefully I'll see you all again.